All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on another terrific episode of Pitch Slap. And we're going to get things started here with Dan the Man and something he's cooking up. So, Dan, whenever you're ready, the show is yours.
So it's nothing I'm cooking up. It's something that's been cooked, has rotted, and I need to restore. I need to like reverse engineer. No. So today I don't know. I kind of wanted to try something a little different. I'm gonna talk about a piece that I've already written that you know about stuff. Um, Perhaps somebody watching doesn't know, so I'll sort of recap the gist of the story. But tonight, I think what I'm looking for, instead of just like pitching ideas and having us like maybe like build out the idea, I kind of want to like examine some of my habits as a writer and try to like get better at doing certain things. And that's purposely vague right now, and I will get into what I mean. But I think the piece I'm bringing in tonight is sort of representative of some of the best things I have to offer as a writer, and also some of the worst things. And I think, you know, if I walk in tonight and like I think of this is just a bunch of moving pieces, uh, that we can like play with, that I don't have to take too seriously because I don't really think I'm gonna dive back into this story and like redo it. But I think if you and I just talk about it, perhaps I can learn some things, extrapolate some lessons that I can use for other stories. So now that I've just like bored everyone to death, so the story that I'm bringing tonight is Ragman. It's so I know it's a story that Stefan is pretty fond of, and like I was pretty fond of at some point, and it's not like my worst piece of writing, but like I have some mixed feelings about it. Um, to everybody who isn't Stefan, let me recap the story. So it's a bit of a political horror story, starring a man and his wife who moved to Fall River, Massachusetts. It's very much like a story set in a particular place, and it is a story shaped around that place. So a man moves to Fall River, Massachusetts with his wife with the intention of becoming sort of this rising political star. Um, in the story, he characterizes Fall River as really this crumbling city, with a bunch of poverty, not good infrastructure, not a good political system, sort of like how it is in real life. But that's the way like he walks into it, like really walking in and just characterizing it as sort of a shitty city that he wants to get his hands in, make a difference, and use that really as a stepping stone to more political power, like possibly pursuing a career in Washington. So, his interest in Fall River is mainly political, and it's only temporary. So he walks into the city. He starts as like a low level political job, and while he's in the city, he runs into this myth of the Ragman, which is sort of like a mythical, horrific monster. It's kept purposely vague in the story. Um, this mythical monster that is just causing just harm to the city. That is also vague in the story. Perhaps something that should have been more specific. So he runs into that myth. This man tries to ingratiate himself into Fall River society, tries to gain a reputation, and all the while his wife is suffering through like sort of a mental breakdown. She is pregnant. She is inhabiting her old house. Her parents had lived in Fall River a while ago. Her mom had died, so she's inhabiting an old house, full of past trauma. And she's sort of having a mental breakdown. Um, and really, like, the turning point of the story is where his wife dies by suicide, um, while pregnant, and uh, also leaves, a ring on the kitchen table to signify like she's done with the marriage. So it's really like this turning point in the story. The husband was pretty neglectful of his wife in the first place. So after that point, he's not really interested in the politics of Fall River anymore. He's just like a super depressed bum. He's drinking a bunch of alcohol. He's saying how much he hates the city, and in a weird turn of events, he ends up like setting the city on fire. It sounds really weird because it is.
It's
You know,
genius.
well, what happens in the story to anyone who has not read it is, he sort of goes into like a drunken stupor, where he's sort of hallucinating what's going on. He imagines like the city burning in fire and like sort of like laughing, and then he like comes to, and the city is actually on fire, and he's like, "What the hell just happened?" And um, what had happened, supposedly, it's kept purposely vague. At the end, he confesses that he had set a boiler ablaze in a church across the street, which was set up earlier in the story. And Fall River is notoriously known for like its bad fires in the past. Is been called a city built to burn, and in the end, like, the city does burn. Most of it does, and he, through like some weird alignment of events, like he comes to think of himself as the Ragman, and it gets really weird at the end. So now that I've summarized it, in an unsatisfactory way for our readers, for our viewers, I guess some of the things I want to approach, some lenses I want to approach our discussion stuff, if we could.
Absolutely.
So something I, I don't want to like say this is like a totally bad story on my part. I think something that I have going for me in a lot of my stories is I walk in with sort of a strong concept. Um, like I did with this story, it's sort of like a weird political horror story. I walk in with a strong concept. I walk in like having sort of like a lot of complicated ideas, and also I walk in and I try to like make sentences like sparkle. Like I try to, with everything that I write, I try to have pretty good prose, but something that I feel like I lack in my stories is an active protagonist, and any semblance of plot. Uh, you know, if my discussion, my summary of the story sounds pretty plotless, it's because it really is plotless. It's just sort of a meandering story of events and things that happen to the protagonist, which isn't always bad, but it's something that I notice about my storytelling in particular, that I think I want to try to get out of. So that's something I want to talk about, because, Steph, something I really admire about your writing in particular is that I feel like with 95% of your stories, you like you walk in with a strong plot. You know what I mean? Like, there, it's usually never like something happening to somebody and them reacting. You have characters that have motivations and like actively push the story forward. Like, I'm thinking of like Kaboko You know, like that story where it's like you have a conflict of interest of political greed and this hippopotamus mom trying to save her baby. Like these are characters that want something and are really like actively pursuing it. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of your stories are you do a really good job with that, and I don't. You know what I mean? And I'm not even saying that to like beef your ego stuff. Like I think that's just something that comes more naturally to you, maybe that just doesn't for me. And I kind of I kind of want to hear like if Stephen Welch had to write Ragman, like if Stephen Welch had to like kind of write his own version of Ragman, with like the pieces I have in it, like how would you approach it? And like I'm not even asking you to do like a rewrite because truly like I don't imagine going back into the story and re-editing it. I just want to hear like your thoughts on what you would do differently, like not even like differently as a I'm trying to hedge this because I can already sense a little hesitation like, oh, I liked your story, and I don't want to tell you to do anything differently. I'm not asking you to put a judgment on what I have, but I'm asking you to like, if you had these pieces, like how would you play around with them,
Okay.
because it would be different than the way I would, and I'm just interested to hear how you would do it.
Well, first, my friend, I just got a couple things I'd like to say. One, I appreciate your very kind words.
Okay.
I really, really do. That means an awful lot. Two, I also really like that the genre you've labeled it as a political horror. I think that's awesome. And it's very timely for the times we had lived in for 4 years and possibly even longer in some areas. Uh, but I think that's awesome. Political horror. That's awesome. Uh, and not to take the words out of your mouth, but in all sincerity, and I happily go along with some ideas that how I may play with things, but uh, I love Ragman. Like I really love Ragman a lot. Like the character, in your summary, I know you talked about our main dude, but like Thomas Ivy, right? That's another like great side character, that you crafted, and you mentioned the pros you have, like the pros you feel of your own writing. And I agree. I agree with all of the things you said. I feel like your characters feel grounded and real. You know what I mean? And like the whole idea of a man trying to rise above his status in the political sphere. That's a very real thing. People do that every day. And the fact that you've centered it, not so much just in this like one guy's life, but in an actual city that has actual hardships, and you incorporate that in there. Like in the story, I know when you say, the town slogan is "We'll try," and then like he's like, "Well, yeah, we're gonna try to get to Washington from here." So like there's a lot of good stuff in there, right? So, I just wanted to say that again.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Now you're asking in terms you said that you feel like you don't have an active protagonist.
I think yes. And I also think that this is representative of a lot of my writing. Do you want me to like elaborate on what I mean by active protagonists?
Well, I guess yes. What is your definition of an active protagonist? Because I'm thinking back. Yeah, yeah. If you don't mind, what's an active protagonist?
Yeah. So I think an active protagonist versus like a passive one is one that has a motivation, acts on their motivation, and actually like their what they do has tangible effects on the story. You know what I mean? Like I think with my protagonist, especially in Ragman, but in a lot of my stories, like I may have like an interesting voice or like an interesting character, but what they do really doesn't have much effect, or it doesn't have like any consequences on the story. What the what the main character of Ragman does, to pursue his motivations doesn't really have an effect on the city. It doesn't really like come to bite him in the butt. I don't know. It doesn't really like move the story forward in any way. It's more like things happen to him rather than him actively doing stuff, which maybe in the context of Ragman it works because it is sort of like a horror story and like he was destined to become like the Ragman, regardless of whatever paths aligned. That was sort of like destined for him. But I feel like with a lot of my stories, like I just have a person that they're just like, yeah, this sucks. I don't like this, and I don't know.
Well, if I may, and I don't mean to cut you off by any means.
Yeah,
So if I did, I apologize.
please take the mic.
I
Shut me
guess
up.
no, because I think what you're saying is very real. But I think also something, Dan, is like uh, sometimes people write characters. People you don't ask to be put in certain events; they just kind of happen, and then you kind of deal with them. So I think in terms of like you just said, it's kind of a horror story. You have our main character here in Ragman, right? And I think what's cool about Ragman is there's this gentleman who has heard about the myth of Ragman, right? Hears people talk about it, right? It's like especially when that scene with Thomas Ivy, it like he didn't give a shit what that guy is screaming about. He's like, "Yo, your time is up at this meeting. We don't have time for this." So what I think is cool is you have like the monster, right? The Jason Voorhees character who's doing all this stuff, but it's like through the lens of focusing on somebody who's not like supposed to be the traditional main character, right? Like you have like essentially a background guy who maybe drives by the camp, right? Has nothing to do with the camp, but then somehow in the end it comes full circle. So I think that's a very interesting approach in what makes it unique, right? Because you know, you have two parallel people operating for different things of power. This guy's looking for political power, right? And he doesn't care who he has to steamroll, ignore, or whatever to get it. And then you have the Ragman, who's like feeding off of like the misery and depression that the people of Fall River are going through. So two varying things trying to achieve separate goals. So I think it's cool that you're telling these two stories, laterally to each other, and then in the end they coincide, right? Like because his wife, who even though he doesn't act like he loves her, right? Like they moved here strategically for him, because she had bad experiences back home, right? Like she didn't want to go back probably, but her father-in-law had connections there. So, and that's all in your story. So the Ragman, from what like, because he's a myth, right? I think if you were to go back and if like I think it's fine now as it is, right? That's my solid final answer always. I love this
Okay.
story. How if I were to go back, it would only be to expand. It wouldn't be to change anything. It'd be to expand in small segments. Like perhaps more uh notions of this guy hearing about Ragman, and he's just like, "What the hell is it with you people in this mumbo jumbo?" Right? Like, like Ragman, it seems like takes what you love and hold dear, so you have nothing but the rags on your back, right? Which he uses as like puppet strings, right? You become part of his armoire of souls or whatever. So and you said that just in your breakthrough, right? Like, oh, he goes into a stupor, wakes up, realizes he's the one who burnt down the church, right? So he's having these lucid visions of what he might be doing or what he's told he's going to be doing. So once his wife is gone and his child's gone, he has nothing else. It's gone, right? Now he belongs to the Ragman. So it's in a way, it's kind of like how one story folds into the other, and I think that's what makes it cool. It's like, yo, you're not a believer, but by the end, you believe.
So, I guess so. This has been sort of an illuminating conversation on that story because the way you interpreted it was not the way I thought. So I kept the end purposely vague because I just didn't really like. I guess it was sort of a cop out on my part because I was like, well, the best monsters are ones that are sort of vague, but you just like interpreted it much more complexly than I feel like I wrote it. Because I wrote it as him actually being the Ragman. Like him, and again, it is kept purposely vague. Like it's nobody says like you are the Ragman, but like Thomas Ivy comes up to him and whispers Ragman. I mean, Thomas Ivy's like the blind man,
Mm-hmm.
who can supposedly see, you know, the Ragman, and he says Ragman to Thomas Ivy. And I think like the last it is really like a weird paragraph because it's like the main character saying like he can see the Ragman, but he's also the Ragman. It's like, but I am the Ragman. It's a weird paragraph. And he's like floating above the city. Really weird. That's another probably trademark of my writing that I need to get better at that. Making things a little bit more explicit. uh, you know, but I, regardless, I think the way you interpreted the story is better than it is written. And I think it's sort of indicative of some of your strengths and some of the things I want to learn. You know what I mean? Because you talked about like these two parallel stories working side by side, and about the protagonist like kind of discovering he's part of like a bigger plot that he's ignoring. And I wasn't really seeing that while I was writing it. But I honestly think the way you interpreted it, and I don't know if anybody else interprets it the same way. If so, kudos to me for writing something I don't understand and people understand better than I do. You know, uh, yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say, stuff.
Well, I think there should be kudos to you, man, because like when you wrote it, right? I agree. The monsters that are the coolest are the ones you don't necessarily fully understand, and this kind of acts that still I think it plays that out because you don't necessarily fully understand Ragman. You just know it's this other this entity. Like you said, I interpret it as this other entity. But even if our main dude is the Ragman, right? Even so, right? Maybe he has a self fulfilling like prophecy, right? Because his wife was picked on and called, Raghor Lenore, that whole thing. So it has ties within the family, right? Like it's still good. It still plays out, you know, just as you would hope. Where it's like, oh, bad shit happens. It's interesting and spooky, and I think it has something to do with the world you're building, right? So like you've created this doorway, right, that can lead to other things, but it's just dark, right? We don't know how it's gonna go, which is it's good. It leaves people wanting more, But I think this is a good introduction to some of the stuff that perhaps you are gonna dabble in more ways than one. Not necessarily Ragman, but like that whole okay, this is it's an origin story or an intro to this character in this world. And I think that doesn't mean um your guy isn't like not active because he is active. If he didn't go to that meeting, he would have never met Thomas Ivy, right? If he never met his wife, he if he never lost his wife, he never would have like been susceptible or burned said church down, right? If he didn't have goals, he never would have came here to try and make a name for himself.
So I wanna return to just something you said before when you were talking about the event when like Thomas Ivy is like yelling, and then he's like, your time is over. you know that wasn't him who was saying like your time is over. It was like somebody running the meeting, and he was like the person on the side. But like that little, like, I don't even know if you did it consciously or if it was just like, it's been a while since you read the story, but the way you said it, like, that is 100 times better than the way it's written. You know what I mean? Like him actually being the person who is like being by the book, and like he's new to the city, and he's like, listen, dude, your time is up. Like, my guy doesn't interfere at all. He's not the one initiating anything. And this is what I mean by sort of like a passive protagonist. Like, my guy in the story, literally, he just sits by and watches a lot of weird shit happen. And he hears a lot of weird shit happen, and he does very little to, like, make stuff happen. Like, he has a motivation walking into the story. Like, he wants to be big, but he doesn't make big strides in the story, which is maybe just the limitation of it being a short story. If it was like a novel, which I don't ever plan on writing a novel about Ragman.
We can hope.
I don't. No, I hope not. So maybe it's just it being like a limited slice of perhaps a larger story, but I just think like the way you had remembered it as him being like the one who was the active participant in that meeting, I was just like, see, that is something that didn't come naturally to me. That is something that I wish I had written now. You know what I mean? I wish I had made him the active participant in that role, because I think it would have fit his character too, because the character is a person who like plays by the book, and he's kind of like a no nonsense kind of guy, and I think it would have played nicely to that story. And it was a missed opportunity, I feel like. Now that you just said it real quick. Sorry.
No, and okay, so like that's maybe, right? Maybe, but I guess additionally, right? Even if you're saying he is new, right? He's new to the city and everything and how things operate. So even if he is just watching by and listening to what this dude is talking about, right? Like listening to the shit that people are coming to these meetings and saying. He's not saying anything, right? Because he doesn't know where to stand or what remarks to make. Just kind of seeing how things are done. Even that makes perfect sense. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't got to believe what they're saying. He just has to like when you're being trained for something. He's gotta see how things operate, find his niche, right? See what role, read people, like that kind of thing. Sit back and watch. So I think it's cool that like darkness is not just touching like the quote unquote main people, but it does also affect the people off to the side, right? Like when Sam and me, we did a review on Wonder Woman, and Barbara Minerva is somebody who watches life from the sidelines, right? Bad things happen to people on the sidelines too, and even if this dude has aspirations to be big, even if he's on the sidelines, it doesn't mean Ragman can't touch him.
Right. Well, okay, I want to use the example you just threw at me, Wonder Woman, Barbara, that character, because I feel like, yeah, she is a character who has things happen to her, but she also is one, like, a person who, like, pursues her desire, right? Like, she makes choices in the story that, like, tangibly affect the story, So, yeah. I don't know. I feel like perhaps I have I have thrown a lot at you and was like, rewrite Ragman, which is not what I wanted you to do by any means, and I think you have provided me with some like helpful things to consider. But I also want to like switch the topic of conversation around Ragman, because I think there's like another thing that is pretty something I am recognizing in my writing that I want to get away from. And it is my and I'm pretty embarrassed to say it, it's my characterization of women as really like passive characters, but really auxiliary to a male character, right? So I've done this in a few stories so far, but I think Ragman is sort of a representative sample of this. The main protagonist's wife is written as a passive protagonist. That's just the way she was written, but really her story is defined by her connection to her husband, largely because it's a story told by the husband's point of view. But ultimately, while writing, like, the only foreseeable future I could see for the wife was like her dying. and her death being like, you know, being really like a catalyst for her husband's story, um and I don't like there are I think this is probably because I've been conditioned to see a lot of these types of stories, and just like internalize them, just accept them. But I think the more I reflect on it, I think there's possibly a more creative way to give that character agency, to not solely define her by her connection to um, the main protagonist, um, and to sort of have a similar outcome. You know what I mean? Have like it lead to like the protagonist like downward spiral. You know what I mean? Like I think if the wife had simply divorced the husband in the story and like ran away, like and done it like publicly, like I think if I could rewrite this story in some way, like I think instead of making it really like an outsider coming into Fall River and just starting a career, and pursuing a political career in Fall River, I would want to like get into the weeds of like him being, being like a candidate for like the mayor's office or something. Like I'm thinking of like the actual young mayor of Fall River who is now going through a trial. Giselle Correa. He literally like the youngest mayor of a city, I think, in like Massachusetts. Um, you know, so like I could picture like this character actually being a part of the mayor's race, and like him being so focused on a political career is like messing up his marriage, and then the wife leaves him in a very public way, and he sort of has to save face, and he wins the election, but at like what cost? You know what I mean? So like I feel like just that little revision of the story um addresses perhaps the passive protagonist thing I talked about at the beginning, but it also kind of addresses really like this egregious need to like just define women by their relationship to the man in their life. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I feel like it was such a failure of my imagination to think of any outcome besides this woman just dying by suicide. You know what I mean? And I don't know if like you are the person I need to speak to about this, if it's a therapist I need to talk to, or if it's just like I need to like get swatted around by like the women writers in my life and be like, you need to stop this shit. But I don't know. It's just something I noticed. Do you have any thoughts, Stefan? I feel kind of embarrassed for opening this can of worms, but
Well, no. I mean, firstly, I think one is very brave and very honest, right? To do what you're doing, right? To examine something that you're something you're proud of, but also, even if I tell you I don't think that those are faults or whatever, and you're still coming forward saying like, look, these are things I believe I need to work on still, like that's brave and commendable on all accounts. So I commend you, sir, on all of that. In terms of this business with the female character, I don't know. I guess I think in your stories that do involve female characters, I would say they're well written, they're well grounded. Perhaps maybe I don't I don't see what's wrong with what you've done in Ragman. And I'm not saying that simply because I'm a fan of their original and what you have written, and I'm not saying that because you're my friend. I really don't see anything you've done wrong, especially like for instance, sure, you could have gone a different route like you said about like her leaving him in some public way, embarrassing him, right? And that could go into a variety of different things. It would still send him on a downward spiral, absolutely. But I think I think there's nothing more horrific than the idea of the person who you love killing themselves and taking your child with them. And this is a dark story, and unfortunately life like that can be dark. I don't think that says anything about you in terms of how you write women. I don't think it says anything wrong about women in general. I think it was like, this guy isn't paying attention to what's going on, and when you don't pay attention, bad things happen.
So I totally 100% understand what you're saying, but something you just said resonated with me. There's nothing more horrific than watching the woman you love die and her taking your child with them. I feel like this goes back to like Edgar Allan Poe's quote about like there's nothing more beautiful than like a dying woman. Like Edgar Allan Poe is like famous for like um for that quote, you know what I mean? And in his stories, like I'm thinking of like the House of the Fall of Usher, like there's a woman in the background who dies and is sort of like a creepy mysterious figure, but is never really given any due. And I feel like this is maybe not just something wrong with my writing, but I'm gonna just characterize it as a pattern. It's a pattern, I think, in horror fiction, but it's also a pattern I'm noticing in my writing that I kind of want to like push back against, because I did write another story, or I tried, called oh god, it was about crows, murder of ravens or something of crows, uh something like that. If you remember stuff, it's about like a woman whose husband died, and then
Yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
crow that comes and she thinks it's her husband. So in that story, again, it's it is a woman primarily like defined by her relationship to her husband, her dead husband. It's a woman who literally cannot let go of her relationship, with her husband. And it like if I had, I'm trying to like articulate this in a way that makes sense. Not that it like I don't even know how to like unpick my brain right now. Like I feel like there's something in my gut that's wrong, but I can't explain why I feel like it's wrong. You know what I
Gotcha.
mean? Just in like reflecting on it, because when I wrote Ragman, I don't think I would have picked up on anything, or I would have like I don't think while writing it I felt icky about writing that. There was one scene that I did feel icky about, but I wrote it was purposely supposed to be icky. It was the part where he literally beats up a pregnant woman. You know that scene where he beats up a pregnant woman,
Hmm.
and
At the cemetery.
yeah, and I feel like that scene, you know, it was written so that you weren't sympathizing with the guy, you were sympathizing with the woman. You know what I mean? So that scene, while like on a plot level is problematic, I feel like you saw him as the bad guy there. You didn't see her as the bad guy. You know what I mean? Um, so I think it's just I don't know what I'm getting at stuff. I think I think I need Hankins here to like tell
Oh
me what
my.
I'm doing
Oh
wrong.
my god.
Hankins, please come on the show. Tell me what I'm, or like Cassandra, Molly, somebody help me untangle this. Like help me articulate this. Help me see why this is possibly a problem, or Steph, if you see it, I don't know.
I wish I could tell you I feel like I'm saying I don't see what the problem is, and then somehow someone's gonna watch this and be like, huh, well, I'll tell you what the problem is, and it's not gonna be a thing. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, man, is like, again, yeah, I honestly don't see the problem, and maybe that's a problem. I don't think it's a problem, because if it was reversed, and I understand there's like, I'm I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think partially it is you need a way of introducing the character. You know what I mean? Right? You're talking about they're brought in because of the connection to their husbands. Okay, but again, the story's not about them, right? You did not write it from her point of view, from her perspective, for her anything, right? It's solely about this man. The other story, it's about a woman tending to her husband. So yeah, she would have to be kind of, you know, connected to her husband. But like if you look at the two stories you wrote about those two women in a relationship, and I'm sorry I don't remember
Yeah.
their names.
Honestly, don't worry. But that was like a very different story. I know what you're talking about. The one with Mal and Sadie. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a very different type of story. So I was like, I was deliberately like changing genres. You know, it was me trying to really just channel like a different spirit. You know, so yeah. But I think when I default to like horror and writing like woman in horror, like it always ends up being like connected to a dude somehow, and then some like horrific outcome for them. You know what I mean? Because of their correspondence to a dude. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Well, if
So
anything, I would say that's accurate. Typically, you have the men who either are the monster or are connected to the monster. And sadly, if anything, what you're writing is the world isn't safe for women. And that's an accurate message, sadly, Dan. Like, it's not. It's dangerous and scary. And it's dudes' faults that that's the way it is. So, if anything, you're highlighting a societal issue that has gone on for far too long.
so I think the way you said that is good. And if I forefronted, like, now that you say that, I was like, man, I could make that like a theme of the story, but like I don't meaningfully engage with that idea in itself, like making it like the responsibility of, like pinning the blame on the protagonist of Ragman per se. Like I don't pin in that story, like I didn't engage with that idea. Like it is partially his fault for his wife's death. Like I didn't have like a moment of reflection there, being like, I don't know. I feel like maybe maybe this is just like a dead end topic, and I'm sorry I brought this to the table and was like, let's workshop this, but
no, man, don't feel bad about it. I'm sorry if anything. I'm not giving I'm not touching on perhaps what it is. I'm not picking up what you're putting down in this instance, and I apologize for that.
Well, this is what I think would be an interesting case study, Steph, is if and I know that's sort of like logistically impossible for both of us, but if you were presented a story of mine that did not have my name on it, I'm not looking for you to make a judgment on that story, but I'm just interested to see like how you would like change it. You know what I mean? And I know that's such a weird request to ask of a friend, specifically a friend who you probably just, it sounds like you enjoyed the story. I'm glad you enjoyed the story, but I also feel like you probably don't want to upset me, which I also think is a good quality for you to have as my friend. But as a potential critic, I think that's maybe like a wall that you hit, so.
No, I can see that.
So I'm just, perhaps I need to confront somebody else, put like, tell me what I'm doing wrong with this story. Just give me notes. Not even like tell me what's going on wrong about this. Just give me notes. What do you think about how I could be doing this differently? You know what I mean? And not to say like this conversation hasn't been helpful, because I think any opportunity to like dissect my writing is potentially helpful, but I'm sorry I might have made you uncomfortable. That's all I have to say. This has been a thrilling episode of Pitch Slap. Sorry, viewers, for making you potentially uncomfortable. But please, if you have any ideas for me, I'm begging you.
If you're
Please.
interested in reading Ragman, go on Amazon, Barnes& Noble, or Lulu.com, type in the Cool Cats Collection, and you can have your very own copy of it.
Or instead of going through a paywall, you could ask. You could ask me. I'll send you a copy, and then you could tell me what I could do differently.
Or praise him like the god he is.
Please don't do that. Enjoy. Stay gold, my friends.